Today we're talking about this one, number 41, The Familiar. This one is another ghost-written one, of course, by Ellen Giroux. Ellen Giroux, where have we heard from her before? Book 33, The Illusion, a book that I detested. So, yes. So let's do what we normally do these days, which is get the author stuff out of the way first. So, this book was written fairly well, I think. There were parts where the descriptions were a bit rushed and it was hard to picture what was going on, a bit hard to follow at times, but for the most part, it was good. And the best part of this book was the handling of the characters, which... and the tone, because that was a big problem with book 33, the tone, where you start, just the way that... If you want to hear more about that pile of trash, go read the review. Stop driving your bloody bikes at this time of day. Goddamn kids. Fucking kids with the little mopeds. I live in a cul-de-sac. They just come in here, turn around and bugger off again. They just need to sod off. They just need to go... fucking sod off. Throw things at them. Little twats. But yeah, the tone of this book and the characters within are perfect. Perfect. And I wouldn't have expected that after Ellen Giroux's latest effort, book 33. Really good job in this one. And that is the best part. This is purely a character-driven story. Purely. There's no outside... Everything that happens in this book, apart from the first two chapters, has no direct impact on the real world. Because this book is 99% dream. A dream. Now, this makes it a bit difficult for me to review. It's a very difficult one to review, so I'm sort of dreading this review. Because the dream itself is very much like the dreams that go on in my head at night. You're doing one thing, and then suddenly you're shifted to another part that's just completely tangential, and you're doing something else. There's no point in there's a slight point. There's not much point in laying out the plot details in a string, because it does come in bits and pieces like that, just like a real dream would. And I love that. I love the fact that there's a little bit of a logical sequence, but largely the dream stuff is very bitty. And I like that, because my dreams are like that. I can relate. I think it's done well. It feels like a dream. It feels like we're in the midst of somebody's crazed lunatic dreams. Not that Jake's a crazed lunatic, at least not yet. A lot of this review is going to be talking about the philosophical stuff as much as I can, because the plot is just a vehicle to deliver that stuff. That's the point of this book. The plot itself isn't that consequential. It's not the main focus of the story, but we will cover it. So we start off in the real world, and it's a blistering start to this one. We don't start with the "My name is Jake" thing. That's like 3 paragraphs halfway through the chapter. But we're into a battle, and as we learn later on, this is a new Yerk pool entrance. You know, there are a few Yerk pools going around here, there and everywhere, but it's down in a 3rd floor basement in like a big apartment building or whatever, like below a car park. And they're in the midst of this battle with a whole load of Hork-Bajir, and they're slowly getting outnumbered, and they're bloody, they're going for this brutal battle. It's much like the start of Megamorphs 4 Back to Before, where they start off and they're in this really horrible battle. And they come out of it, they escape just in time. But before they escape, there's this door coming down to separate them. There's steam everywhere, so they can't really see that much. Marco is trying to get Rachel, who's doing the mean Rachel thing of just fucking wallop this, that and t'other, and doesn't care about what's going on around her, which is where Rachel is at the moment. Marco says, I've got to get Rachel. The others have left, and Jake is in the middle with that door, and he's been told we can't leave them behind. And Jake is put into that decision. And we've seen this before with Jake making these big decisions, and once again, he makes that decision. But thankfully, they managed to get Marco and Rachel out just in time. So there was a compromise between the two things. And I think that is quite a big metaphor for what this story is all about. An attempt to find that middle ground. They got the middle ground this time. They didn't have to leave Marco and Rachel in there, and then Jake didn't have to go out and split the group and get them all killed, so they'd all go back in and get killed by however many Hork-Bajir were in there. They get out of this horrific battle and they escape this building. They go up the floors and they run out into the street. And there are cars everywhere. And then Jake turns back once he's crossed the road, and Cassie has just stopped. And she's stood in the middle of the road, just out, gone. Nothing there, nobody's home. So Jake pulls her aside, and they go into an alley, and now Cassie is starting to bawl her eyes out. And she says, I killed 4. I think I killed 4, maybe even 5, referring to the Hork-Bajir. And if Cassie's killed 4 or 5 in arguably the weakest morph, with the exception of Tobias, then they've killed a lot of Hork-Bajir in this battle. A lot. Probably a mountain of bodies of Hork-Bajir in this battle. And she is understandably just distraught, just gone. She's in tears. She doesn't know what to do. She's not with it. She's gone. Complete breakdown. And what Jake does is he thinks to himself, now is not the time, and just sort of leaves her to it. Leaves her to that grief that she's going through, and goes to sort out the others. Rachel and Marco, well, Rachel's just like, oh, I could have done everything there. Why did you bring me out of that, Marco? Marco's like, you would have gotten yourself killed. And this is just a perfect encapsulation of these characters. Axe is just standing there quietly, not really saying anything, just doing as he's told. And Tobias has gone. He's had enough. He's gone away. Cassie is still inconsolable, and they all decide to go home. And she sort of sulks off without saying anything. And Jake says to Axe, yeah, just make sure she gets home all right, okay? And he goes on, does that. And Jake heads home. He gets home, gets inside, doesn't expect to see Tom there, but Tom is there. And Jake is so tired, he just thinks, whatever, I'm just going to get an early night's sleep. Tom notices, oh, you got blood on you. Why have you got blood on you? Jake makes up an excuse, goes to bed, goes to sleep. Not until after he notices that Tom is looking into his room and stays there for a little while longer, which creeps Jake out a bit. And then we hit the dream sequence, which carries us through to the very last chapter of this book. This start to the book was fantastic, utterly brilliant. Everything about this, the stakes, the context of the previous books, without 39 and 40, right, are non-canon. Just get rid of them from your mind. They're gone. This book follows book 38, and Megamorphs 4 was just the authors having a bit of a play around in between them. This book follows 38. And in the context of that, following from book 38, where they learn that the Andalites aren't coming, this fit perfectly. Absolutely perfectly. Cassie's breakdown, the Animorphs just completely going a bit mental, and Jake being weary, tired, paranoid, all that. These first 2 chapters were brilliant. The characters, everything, just great. It really should follow book 38. Remember, this is where Cassie comes into this. Remember in book 38, where they're doing the facade of trying to trick the Andalites. And one of the things she says was, how do we justify killing Hork-Bajir anymore if the Andalites aren't coming? Yes, it was a facade, but that's something that Cassie very likely believes. Why are they justifying it now? If they know that the Andalites aren't coming, she's taking these lives with there's no sign of safety coming. There's no sign that what they're doing is actually going to affect anything. As far as she's concerned, she's just killing innocent lives. Hence this breakdown. After killing 4 or 5 of them, she's just like, why have I done that? I've just killed them, and what for? And yeah, just that carries through. Everything up to this point is in Jake's head now, and that gets projected into this dream that he has. He wakes up and he's in a cell, and he's delivered food that he has to eat, He's got like an automatic toilet and everything. Turns out he's about roughly 10 years older. We never get an exact date. I don't recall, but he's roughly 10 years older. He's about 25. So from that, we're assuming that the Animorphs are about 15 years old in the present time. And he comes out of this cell. He's already dressed in his work clothes, which is this like orange jumpsuit. And everybody's woken at exactly the same time and just cold marched through the building to a big docking area, and they all get flown off to their various jobs. And he sees this landscape, and there are bug fighters and andalite fighters flying around everywhere, and it's this dystopian nightmare. This is 10 years in the future, and he quickly concludes that the Yeerks have won. He's wondering why he's here. He's very confused, and he does think it's a dream. But that becomes more clear to him later on. But he decides he doesn't go to where he's supposed to go, which is his workplace, and he goes down to the very ground. He's in New York City, by the way. They're all in New York City. Of course, the others are there, but we'll find them later. What happens from this point on is a montage of just things going on, exploring this new world, seeing where things are going. He goes to an underground place where there are these refugees, essentially, these injured... I don't think they're controllers, I think they're free hosts, but they're all either old or mentally disabled or physically disabled, and they're just huddled in this dank pit surrounded by these subways full of Texans, and Jake just... But at this point, he just doesn't know what's going on, so he bolts, he legs it. Turns out there are Andalites, I should have mentioned this before that bit, but there are Andalite controllers now everywhere, so he sees all these groups of Andalite controllers, so the Andalite world is obviously gone. So in this pit, he's seeing humans, Hork-Bajir, Andalites all just sort of clumped around. Leaves them, gets attacked by Texans, manages to get away. Oh, sod off with your fucking bikes! Trying to record here. The magic is being produced. Fuckers. And then he comes across new aliens, and these ones are called Orf. Or O-R-F-F. Orf. And they're like these security ones, like the local Rozzers, the bobbies on the beat. And they're chasing Jake, and they put him in these weird handcuffs. And there are these weird transparent alien things with these eyes, but the iris, the pupil floats around the iris, and you can see all their organs, and they're translucent apart from that. Like, you know, those fish that you get where their bodies are just transparent so you can see all their organs, a bit like that. He manages to get away from the Orf, and he bumps into somebody who turns out to be Cassie. So she saves him from attacks and runs off, takes a shot at him, but they eventually come together in like an amphitheatre, like a stage, in an orchestra pit. And during this time of the orchestra pit, he finds out that Cassie isn't acting very Cassie-like. She shoots a Texan who comes down, is injured, and they run off. She turns around, finishes the Texan off, and Jake suddenly thinks, hold on, this isn't the real Cassie. So they have a discussion. It turns out she's part of the Evolutionist Front, which is this rogue Yeerk group that wants to use artificial hosts, essentially. That's what I got from it. They want to use artificial hosts that are symbiotic to the Yeerks so they can do it without using hosts, essentially. We don't really get into too much detail about that, but Cassie, turns out, is a controller, and she's got a Yeerk name, and Jake is flummoxed by this, of course, but figures out that he is on her side because she is fighting against the major Yeerk empire, essentially. She tells him that the Yeerks are planning to change the moon into a large Kandrona emitter, and that's happening tonight. She doesn't tell him that, but that's something that he does find out. It's from the Chrysler building, which is covered in this wrap, which looks like a giant condom, I imagine. And it's going to shoot a beam up to the moon and turn it into this giant Kandrona ray. And the EF, the Evolutionist Front, don't want that to happen, okay? So she tells Jake, because she finds out that he works in this control center for the thing, you need to go in there and stop it from doing what it's going to do, okay? You go to work and do that. So Jake follows that order and goes along. Now there's this little bit in there, where he's saying, I'm not the leader anymore, she is. Now it wasn't until I had a discussion with Raptor about this book, quite an in-depth discussion, a little bit after that, where I thought, yeah, he had a point, and it was largely the fact that almost like they're swapping roles. Jake feels like he's Cassie, and Cassie is Jake. She's very cold, calculated, gets the job done, and Jake's there like, what about the principles? What about all that sort of stuff? It's like the roles have reversed, okay? A lot of this book comes down to Jake and Cassie's relationship, which we'll get to after we've covered the plot. So he's gone to this Chrysler building, and he goes into his workplace, sits down. There are yerks everywhere. It's just an office building, really. There's cubicles everywhere, glowing office, and other controls around of various different alien races. And he sits at his computer, and it's a mind control computer, and the images start flashing up because he's not used to the controls. He doesn't know what he's going to do. And these other controllers are looking at him thinking, are you all right? You taking your coffee this morning? And then one of my favourite scenes from the book happens. And this falls into the whole, this is a dream sort of concept. He looks up again, and suddenly, instead of these controllers, these normal living controls being there, they're replaced by corpses, like moving corpses. Now, the message we get from this should be pretty obvious. He's carrying the guilt of those that he's killed. So, like, for instance, the Hork-Bajir in the first couple of chapters. Not that I don't think it's those Hork-Bajir specifically, but this guilt suddenly infiltrates his dream, and suddenly everyone around him is one of his victims, essentially. These dead aliens everywhere, and they come up and they start to like zombie grab him, and it's weird. And then next minute he's back into that little office and everyone's normal, but they're all sort of looking at him thinking, oh God, what's going on here? And then the Orf come in with Jake's dad, Steve Berenson, back with us, but in Jake's dream, and says, right, you're under arrest. And not much else comes of Steve being here. It's just another one of those things that pops into this dream, like a little bit added in, which tends to happen with dreams, and I appreciate it for that it just puts it in there as this little idea in Jake's head of where his dad might end up being. But he comes in and says, right, you're under arrest. So Jake starts to fight, but gets captured and put into a big room. That's where he meets Marco. But Marco is now Visser 2. Now, Cassie, when she was talking to Jake earlier, actually explained where all the Animorphs had gone. She'd explained that Marco is now Visser 2. Important. And Rachel was dead. Tobias had disappeared, and Axe was off somewhere else in the galaxy as a major Yerk player or something. And the actual Visser 3 from real time was now part of the council. He's like the Emperor. He was the Emperor, effectively. I don't know what sort of empire wants him to be in charge, but whatever. But Marco comes in, and it turns out he's Visser 2, and he's like, oh, hey Jake, how you doing? How you been? And he wants information from Jake. He wheels Cassie in, who apparently has been captured, and locks her down, and she's about to be tortured. Jake doesn't want Cassie to be tortured. So very quickly, despite Cassie's protests to the contrary, he says, I'll give you the information that you need. And because of that, he is let back out by Marco to go back into the real world. Goes to work, finishes work, goes down, and there's a big Yerk party going on. But this Hork-Bajir comes up to him and says, right, you need to go into this room, into there. Somebody wants to speak to you. And he follows those orders, and he finds Rachel. But Rachel is now in a wheelchair, and she's lost both her legs and one of her arms, and her face is all disfigured. And she's speaking like this. That's the sort of voice I had in my head while I was reading this, so she's basically fucked up. But she talks to Jake, and he's like, I thought you were dead. And Rachel says, no. So Jake's thinking, why would Cassie lie to me? Oh, by the way, before I forget, another little lie. Well, not so much a lie, but when Marco was talking to Jake in that little hostage place, he called himself Visser 3, which Jake immediately caught onto and said, hold on, you're supposed to be Visser 2, aren't you? And Marco said, yeah, well, yeah. And then that's the point where Jake realises this isn't real. I think he had inklings before that, but this is the point where he definitely says, right, this isn't real. This is all some sort of fictional thing going on. This isn't real. And Marco even says to himself, yeah, but you know what? Pain is pain. No matter what happens here, you're going to feel it, and it's going to happen to you, which is quite a haunting thing, really. But yeah, going back to the Rachel bit, She says, you need to go to the library, and these are the directions to it, and we're going to finish off what we need to finish off. But like with any dream thing, it doesn't really need to happen in that particular way. I suppose it does, but regardless, it's a dream. It's not. There's no logical flow. It's all very all like that. And she says, go there. So Jake follows this path, but he's being chased by Orf. There are more Orf security coming. And he goes into a shop trying to hide from them, and then suddenly he's in a hole, and then bang, he's in a new location. Like in a dream, you know, just suddenly turn up somewhere else. And it's this little hideaway for people who've been rescued from the Yerk Empire, essentially. There's a bunch of kids of various different alien races in there, including a bunch of human kids who have drawn these pictures. And somebody explains to Jake what's going on with this. Oh, we rescue these kids. For fuck's sake, what is with you today? Fucking get off your brums and get a job. Jesus Christ. Yes, they've rescued these kids and explained how it all works, how they're free, and they're just trying to keep everyone's hopes up, essentially. And he goes to one of these kids whose name is Justice, which is something that I haven't quite figured out why that name is specifically chosen, but that's a big question, okay? But he shows Jake his picture, and it's a picture of, it's cut diagonally, and there's like a hellscape there, and everyone's crying out and being sad. And on the other side, there's a hot air balloon with a rope, and there are people climbing the rope up to this. He says, that's going to be my friends, essentially. I'm going to be a hero, and I'm going to save my friends. But Jake says to him, the cold reality is, because he's obviously been a party pooper here, cold reality is that sometimes it's not your friends that you're saving, it's those that you don't know that you're saving. Those are the ones you'll be sent off to save. But the kid's like, no, I'm going to save my friends. Before anything else, I'm going to save my friends. And Jake looks at this kid and thinks to himself, this is a naive kid. He doesn't understand that it's not that easy. And then the kid's like, just come over here, I'm going to show you something. Walks him up to a tree, goes through the tree, and bam, he's back into the city. And there's the library. The Orf have stopped tracking him now. He walks into this library. All his lights turn on, and there is Elfangor, or who he assumes to be Elfangor, who at first may well have been Elfangor in his dream. But after a bit of a discussion, it turns out he realises that it's Tobias. They have a discussion about, you were our leader all along, you made these decisions, things turned out this way because of the things that you did. You were always the leader, it was always going to be you, and there's no use in trying to excuse yourself. And then Jake says, you're Tobias, aren't you? He says, yeah. I've morphed Axe and stay with him as a Noflit. So 10 years later, he looks and sounds like Elfangor. But I do believe that in the dream state, it may actually have been Elfangor at first, and just the dream changed him. Possible, but it's not really that important. It might be, I don't know. It's a book about a dream. It's so complicated, and there's so much little stuff that it's hard to figure out, and stuff that I may not even know that I need to figure out. I don't know. Tobias tells Jake that he has a choice, and that choice is to save Cassie or to stop the moon being turned into a Kandrona, which will effectively make the Yerks invincible. That's what they say. That's how the book presents it to us. That the Yerks will be this irremovable force from Earth once the moon is turned into this big Kandrona emitter. You don't have time. It's either you do that or you save Cassie. And Tobias says, Jake, you need to put the emotions aside. You need to save the world. But Jake is holding on to those little principles, and he wants so desperately to save Cassie. He goes out, runs away from Tobias, Axe Tobias, morphs Falcon, and flies up. And he sees everything down there. Turns out the beam from the Chrysler building is just powering up. And Cassie... Now, this is one of the parts where the writing sort of lost me because of how it was described. I couldn't quite picture in my head, but Cassie is there, like near the beam, and she could get killed by it. So he's got this choice in the moment of, right, I can save Cassie by going and removing her thing, but then the beam will shoot off. But Cassie is there saying, Jake, if you just hit yourself against the beam thing, that'll stop it from working properly and you'll save us. So Jake's then given that decision. Much like the one at the start of the book in real life, he's got that choice. And just like then, he gets given an out. Because Cassie breaks herself free and bumps into the beam, solving both those problems, much like what happened at the start of the book. He's gifted that middle ground compromise is given to him. But then Cassie is taken back into the building where she's held hostage, and this beam will light up again, which means the choice is back on. And I think there's something in that. It's like an allegory or a metaphor or something along those lines, where, yeah, you've been let off this time, but you've not truly been let off. Eventually that choice will have to happen. Compromise is not always going to happen and is not always going to be possible. So he goes into this building through a crack in the ceiling that turns out to be there. Again, it's a dream. In that sense, it's fine. And he goes into this control room, and there's Marco cackling because he's Visser 2 now, or Visser 3 as he called himself. It's a dream, what have you. And there are a bunch of Hawk-Bajir controllers and Orf controllers there, and Jake gets into a fight. He morphs Tiger, starts doing all this, and there's a countdown. And he gets what happens then is Cassie is pushed out of the building, but it turns out she's holding on the edge, and there's an abort button for the big beam. So Jake has two choices there, two clear choices. We never find out which he takes. It ends with him having like 3 seconds left, and he leaps. Dream ends. And we're given no indication of which one he chooses. I think we can come to our own conclusions, and I believe I've come to mine. But once that happens, he wakes up and everything's back to normal. But there's this voice, and it's a voice that isn't the Ellimist. It's not Kryak, because Jake says it himself. It doesn't sound like them. It's not the same thing. Nor is it, it's just this disembodied voice saying, interesting choice. You humans are good at reconciling things, your subconscious and your unconscious mind, which is mysterious and leaves me confused, but not bad confused. It's like, it adds to this weird mystery that is this book. And the last action of the book is he calls Cassie and he says, "Are you okay?" And that's the end of the book. Whoa, blimey, what a package to unpack. This thing is, I'll say it now, this is the most mature Animorphs book up to this point. By far. I've got no question, there's no question about that. Just in a way that it poses all these questions, but never gives you an answer. It's left to you to decide what the real answer is, because there is no real answer to these questions. What is the main question here? Family, duty. That's it. That's the big question in this book. Do you choose your family, your principles, what you hold close, or do you sacrifice that for the greater good? It's like he's stuck between Marco and Cassie. Cassie, family, principles, doing the right thing. Marco, I'm Mr. A to B. I get the job done, even if it means making these big sacrifices. You've just got to pass that. Those are the two things. And this whole book is experimenting with that and thrusting it into Jake's dreams with these futuristic scenarios. But it never gives us the answer. It doesn't preach at us. It doesn't say, well, what you should do is hold your principles, or you should make these personal sacrifices for the greater good. It does none of that. It doesn't. It's entirely down to your interpretation. And because if that had happened, if it had become that preachy bit, I would have had a much lower appreciation for this book. But the fact that it leaves it so open-ended, that there is no clear answer, is just so perfect for the Animorphs series. It fits the theme so well and brings it to a new level. What do I think was the decision that he made? Well, I've got the benefit of knowing some of the big decisions that Jake makes in future books, okay? And I think because of what I know that happens later, I think he made the leap for the abort button. He decided, okay, I can't just keep Cassie alive and screw the rest of humanity. I need to do this for the greater good. Not that that's the right decision, not that that's the wrong decision. It's a decision. A big, monumental decision for yourself, your humanity, and all of that sort of stuff. But not only do I think that's the major reason, knowing what happens in the future, but what happens at the very end, he calls Cassie. The first thing he does is he calls Cassie and says, "Are you okay?" Now, I'm not sure about you, but if I feel like I've wronged somebody, the first thing I do is, or I know that somebody's had a bad time, the first thing I'll do is console them or make it up to them or whatever. It's a guilt thing. So from my perspective, my interpretation of this is Jake made that decision in his dream. And he woke up and thought, shit, in my dream, the way I looked at that scenario, I let Cassie die. Ring Cassie up. You okay? And that's my interpretation of that specific scene. But what are the deeper things in this book? This is the hardest part of the review because it's so hard. And whatever I say here is going to be purely subjective. It's such a deep book. And there's so many little things going on, even down to the Orf, those new aliens that have these transparent bodies that Jake realises, oh, if you try to punch for the actual organs, that's a facade. You've got to punch for the parts that look like they've got nothing in them. And it has the true effect. I get the feeling that there's some metaphorical thing going on there, but I haven't figured it out in my head. There's something about that specifically, why the Orf have been put into this story and they're done the way they are. There's something. It doesn't feel like it's just, oh, let's put a translucent alien in there, transparent alien in there. No, it feels like there's some need, there's some little metaphor in there, but I can't for the life of me figure it out. And that excites me. The fact that I know that there's stuff in this book that I still haven't managed to grab a hold of, it excites me. And there's so many themes in this book, and largely it comes down to Cassie and Jake. Cassie plays a major part in this book. I mentioned earlier how it seemed that the roles had briefly swapped. And Cassie is the leader, dishing out orders to Jake, and he's like, what about our principles? What about our principles? And he sees Cassie as this cold person. And he partly thinks, and it's reinforced by Tobias later when he says, you were the leader. This is all him thinking of what he's doing to his peers and what he's doing to the world as a whole. The world as a whole has fallen into this North Korea, Maoist China communist nightmare where everyone's individuality is just erased. And judging from Megamorphs 4, Jake is more of a libertarian sort, so this is his worst nightmare, the world being this awful thing. Not only that, but it's the fucking Yerks, which is not great. Jesus, it's a dystopian nightmare, and his friends as well, they've all suffered. Rachel's lost her mobility, her power to do anything other than talk, essentially. Cassie is this ruthless, cold killer who's lost her principles. Tobias has lost who he is entirely and has taken the body of Axe, who is off somewhere else in the universe working for the Yerks. And Marco is Visser 2, much like his mother was Visser 1. And all of this comes from Jake's psyche, from the couple of chapters we saw at the start where they've just had this horrible battle and he sees these characters reacting the way they do at the end of the battle. Okay? Where Tobias has just flown off, Cassie's in bits, Rachel and Marco are doing their Rachel and Marco thing. And it's all shoved into this dream in little metaphorical pieces that you have to piece together. It's not one that you can just read and think, oh, I've read the story, I know what that's about. It's not that. It's a puzzle, this book. And it's finding where the little metaphors fit real life and all this, but the large part of this book is placing Jake into a new outlook. Before this book, yeah, he made the big decisions. He made those big calls. That's what he's started to do. Everything that he's done has been for the benefit of the Animorphs team. Let's face it, most scenarios where he's had to make the big calls, it's been, right, we need to save the other member of our team. We need to save this person we know. This book changes that, because in the end, I believe, the decision he made was let Cassie die for the bigger goal. Now his focus as a leader is less on his team. It's away from his team and is on the bigger picture. And he has to be prepared to make those big sacrifices. And I thought, oh, he's made decisions like that before where he wants to sacrifice his principles for the sake of the greater good. And I thought, oh, remember book 31 where he decided to torture Chapman. Why did he do that? To save his family. Would he do it to save somebody else's family? Or the rest of humanity aside from his family? That was the big question here. It's a new question. It's a new challenge for Jake. And it puts him in a different perspective. I think another big part of this book is just the team. The Animorphs team. Because as I said earlier, I'm considering this as following book 38 when they've just had that big news that the Andalites are not coming. We're seeing the Animorphs start to deal with that news. Okay? Jake needs that reassurance that what he's doing is going to make a difference, which is sort of like what we saw in Back to Before, but again, it happens here, seeing what the world is like if they make the wrong decisions. But Cassie is a very important one here as well, because she is very rapidly falling off the wagon. And this, I believe, is the moment where that starts to really happen, at the start of this book. And I think it's terribly important, not only for how it affects Jake's dreams and how he sees the world around him, but also just Cassie in herself. She's just had this news that the Andalites aren't coming, and she's then gone into a battle and wasted 4 or 5 Hork-Bajir. She's devastated. Absolutely devastated. And this is the part where she starts to go, woof, and the divide between the characters comes. And we see that in this book, that suddenly the team is split. And that becomes very important as we move on to further books. And I think, give book 39 its credit. That was the hidden with the buffalo. But what it did in that book was it showed that the Animorphs, the 5 of Ranos, are always ahead of her, and she was following along trying to keep up. That was a metaphorical thing as well. That's the one part of that book that I think fit with the rest of the story. Cassie is falling behind. And this is another big step for that. She's just broken down. And we'll see how she does in the next few books. This book is not very well liked by the Animorphs community. And I can understand why. I can. Because it is so very different to the other Animorphs books. It's not given to you on a plate. It's not, here's a message about caring for the ones you love. Here's a storyline where they destroy the Kandrona Ray. It's very confusing. And I still haven't properly figured it out. But it's not bad confusing. People might think it is. They might think, oh, it's just a dream and there's this weird scenario and he has to save Cassie, but he doesn't, or whatever. Maybe he does. And to a lot of people, I understand that it might seem needless. Especially, I talked to Raptor about this. We've just had Megamorphs 4, where Jake's in his bedroom and suddenly he sees the past and how things would have been different. I think if it weren't for that, if Megamorphs 4 wasn't around, this book would seem a lot more appealing, because it feels like it's a retread of that. It's not, as far as I'm concerned. It's completely different. Yeah, it's about dreams and non-realities playing out with different scenarios, but in one, it's looking back at what would have happened if we'd made a different decision. This one is nothing to do with decisions. It's not. Not really. It partly is, but it's more about Jake realising what's going on with his team and just so many other bits and pieces in there. It's so much more than just, oh, this is what the future will be like. It's not really that at all. It's all the other things. And yeah, I don't want to start on that again. I'll be here for another half hour. This book also suffers in that it follows on from 39 and 40. If this followed book 38, like if this was book 39, I think it would have a lot more appreciation from the fan base because it would be in the right context. Because of books 39 and 40, this one just feels isolated, like it hasn't followed on from anything. But if it followed on from the revelations of book 38, I think this one would seem to make so much more sense to the readers because it fits. It fits. And I think another big problem that I've heard from people is, oh, it was just a dream. It doesn't actually do anything. And there's the obvious trope of, oh, it was just a dream. The problem with that trope is that you don't know it's a dream until that moment where they wake up, oh, it was just a dream. This book doesn't do that. It pretty much puts a label on it from the very start. This is a dream. And Jake figures it out pretty quickly. This isn't real. This isn't actually going on. So we don't get that moment of being let down. Oh, it's just a dream? What a letdown. No, we know. We know it's not. And I think the book does good to avoid that, because that would have felt a bit like a letdown. But yeah, it's very clearly a dream. We know it is. And I can't find fault with that. A lot of people might. That's a sad state. A much maligned book, book 41. 10 out of 10. I can't find that many flaws with it. I mean, at times the writing isn't great because it doesn't describe things that well, but apart from that, it does what it needs to do. I mean, the only thing that would stop me from giving it a 10 out of 10 is the fact that there's no real standout. Oh, there is a standout moment at the very start. What am I saying? It's a 10 out of 10. I'm trying to second guess myself to find out a way that this isn't a 10, but I can't. It's a 10. Jake's leadership. Oh, fuck. Where do you begin with that? I haven't scored him much on leadership recently because I haven't had the chance to. And it's one of those, again, where it feels like I shouldn't be scoring him on his leadership. He's not a leader for the majority of this book. He's more an observer. He was a leader for the first couple of chapters and then for the last chapter where he calls Cassie. He doesn't talk to Cassie at the start when perhaps he should have. Done more to console her after she's just been completely destroyed. He gets them out of there. I'm going to give him a 5. Just slap in the middle. I'm reticent to rate him at all, but there were some moments that I need to rate him for. But yeah, that's that. But yeah, the book itself, 10 out of 10. It's so maligned by people in the Animorphs community, and yeah, I understand it. I get it. It's a dream. It doesn't play into the overall story directly, but I think indirectly it does. This is the great change for Jake's character. This is almost the foreshadowing of what's to come. His divergence from Cassie, the big decisions he'll end up making, and it was a thrilling read above everything else. It was just such a good read. Right up to the last chapter, I wanted to know what was happening. Ellen Giroux, The Illusion was crap. Your last ghost-written book, but bravo. Coming back with this is superb, and maybe I was wrong about you. I don't think I'll change my opinion on The Illusion. And I said this to Raptor, actually. I mean, in The Illusion, you get scenes where, for example, they're trying to sneak into this community centre, so they break a window. Tobias flies in, and Axe is already there. And it's just crap, illogical consistency. Maybe it was good that they gave her a book about a dream where there's no need for logical consistency. Great, we found your niche, Ellen Giroux. But no, seriously. Going from The Illusion, a freaking train wreck, to this. I know that a lot of people will be like, no, those scores are the wrong way around. The Illusion's a 10 out of 10 and this one's a 2 out of 10. No, sorry. You've heard it from me, the #1 Animorphs fan. There's so much to explore this that I can't do it in one video. I can't. And it's just so much to grab onto and enjoy. The Illusion was crap. Didn't develop Tobias at all. It was just fucking torture. And the first half of the book was really shit plot. So there's that. Yeah, less dunking on the illusion, that's that. This book feels like it needs to now go on to the crunch, the big end game. I mean, I've said that about book 38, but this one following it up is stunning and a good follow-up and an appropriate one. Sod books 39 and 40. This one should now lead into book 45. What have we got next? Oh, God. Helmicrons. I'm really not looking forward to this. Do you know why? I hate to rush to judgment about it, but we're hitting the crunch. This is 38 and 41. It's making that final turn. And then the fucking Helmicrons show up and a Rachel book to boot. God, please save us all. Anyway, that's next week. I hope you've enjoyed this one. I've probably surprised some of you with my review today. I thought this was fantastic. Not the best in the series, but it's among them. I love it. I love it to bits. Great book. Yeah, next week we're dealing with Helmicrons and flying through Marco's body. Great change of tone, Animorphs series. Twats. Yeah, thank you very much for watching. I shall see you next week. Ta-ra.